continue from Nehemiah. Remember, we are doing a series on Nehemiah. So just turn with me to Nehemiah chapter 1. I want to read Nehemiah chapter 1, just 11 verses. And this is what we have covered so far. And then we'll move on to chapter 2. The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah. And it came to pass in the month Chislew, in the 20th year, as I was in Shushan the palace, that Hanani, one of my brethren, came, he and certain men of Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews that had escaped, which were left of the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said unto me, the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burnt with fire. And it came to pass, when I heard these words, that I sat down and wept, and mourned certain days, and fasted, and prayed before the God of heaven, and said, I beseech thee, O Lord, God of heaven, the great and terrible God, that keepeth covenant and mercy for them that love him, and observe his commandments. Let thine ear now be attentive, and thine eyes open, that thou mayest hear the prayer of thy servant, which I pray before thee now, day and night, for the children of Israel thy servants, and confess the sins of the children of Israel, which have sinned against thee. Both I and my father's house have sinned. We have dealt very corruptly against thee, and have not kept the commandments, nor the statutes, nor the judgments which thou commandest thy servant Moses. Remember, I beseech thee, the word that I commandest thy servant Moses, saying, if ye transgress, I will scatter you abroad among the nations. But if ye turn unto me, and keep my commandments, and do them, though there were of you cast out unto the uttermost part of the heaven, yet will I gather them from thence, and will bring them into the place that I have chosen to set my name there. Now these are thy servants and thy people, whom thou hast redeemed by thy great power and by thy strong hand. O Lord, I beseech thee, let now thine ear be attentive to the prayer of thy servant, and to the prayer of thy servants, who desire to fear thy name and prosper. I pray thee, thy servant this day, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man, for I was the king's cupbearer. Now, we covered these verses in 2 studies, and we said the first chapter gives an account of the state of Jerusalem and Nehemiah's grief and prayer. He received a report, remember, from his brother and some others who had gone to Jerusalem about the condition of the city of God. And verses 3 and 4 tell us the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burnt with fire. And it came to pass, when I heard these words, that I sat down and wept and mourned certain days, and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Now, you know how hard it was for him when he heard what was happening or the condition of Jerusalem. The walls were broken down, the gates set on fire, the people are disconsolate, there's no motivation and only sadness. So when he heard these words, he said that he sat down and he cried, and he wept, and he fasted before the God of heaven. And then last week we looked at the prayer that he prayed to God. And first, that's from verses 5 to 11. And he addresses the great God of heaven, verses 5 and 6. I'll go through it very quickly. And then he confesses his sins and the sins of the nation from verses 6 to 7. He didn't say these people sin, but he said we have sinned. So he included himself among the sins of his nation. Then he reflected on the promises of God, verses 8 to 9. He said if we disobey, that God is going to punish us, but if we repent and we come to him, that he's going to forgive and he's going to bless us. And then he turns to God, who shares a special bond with his people, and we could see that in verses 10 to 11. Now, this man, brethren, he reverenced God. This is a man who he knew God, no doubt. He had a very good relationship with God. And the best way to respond to God's revelation is by reverencing him, to fear God. Nehemiah feared God. Not afraid of God, but he feared God. Yeah? Great respect for the Almighty. So he knew, and to fear God, you have to know him. That's what the Bible said. Proverbs 9:10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. So to fear him, you must know him. Not only know him, but you must trust him. Psalm 34, verse 1 and 22. So you to fear, you know, you trust, and you obey. Proverbs 8:13, the fear of the Lord is to hate evil, pride and arrogancy, and the evil way, and the proud mouth do I hate. So remember, Nehemiah, he was a man who feared God. Yeah, he feared God, very godly. He knew God, he trusted God, and he obeyed God. And at the end of verse 11, he says, I pray thee, thy servant this day, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. For I was the king's cupbearer. And this man, he's talking about the king Artaxerxes. He was the cupbearer. He had to choose the wine. Remember that? He had to choose the wine and safeguard it from poison. So that was a very difficult job indeed. But as a cupbearer, of course, he had access to the king. It was a difficult job, but it was also a privileged job. And he had a lot of influence, I'm sure. But let's go to chapter 2. And I want to read a few verses from verse 1. And it came to pass in the month Nisan. I keep saying Nisan as though it's a car, but it should be Nisan, N-Y-E-S-A-N. That's the way it's supposed to be pronounced. In the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him, and I took up the wine and gave it unto the king. Now I had not been before time sad in his presence. Wherefore the king said unto me, why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then I was very sore afraid, and said unto the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad, when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres, lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? Then the king said unto me, for what dost thou make request? So I prayed to the God of heaven. And I said unto the king, if it please the king, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldest send me into Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it. And the king said unto me, the queen also sitting by him, for how long shall thy journey be? And when wilt thou return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. Moreover, I said unto the king, if it please the king, let letters be given me to the governors beyond the river, that they may convey me over till I come into Judah, and a letter unto Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the palace which appertain to the house, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall enter into. And the king granted me according to the good hand of God upon, or according to the good hand of my God upon me. Now, my subject this evening is when God intervenes. When God intervenes. And we have read the whole of the passage I'm going to talk to you about. But remember, 4 months went by between Hananiah's trip from Jerusalem to his brother Nehemiah and the king's inquiry. 4 months. But Hananiah came, and then he told him the condition, and he prayed, and he brought those requests before the Lord. And up to the time he really had the opportunity to speak to the king, to present his case, it was about 4 months. So during that time, Nehemiah waited patiently. Beloved, he waited patiently, and he prayed for guidance from God. Now, do you think 4 months is a long time to wait to know God's will? I'm asking you all a question very early this evening. Do you think to wait, do you think 4 months, is a long time to wait to God, to know God's will? I want you to be honest. Huh? Somebody said yes, and all the others said no. So who is honest and who is not honest now? Like, for example?
Depending on what your need is, you may see that's something you need now.
Mm-hmm.
So you will find that 4 months is a long time to wait for it.
Mm-hmm. That's a good answer. Anybody else? If you have an emergency, I think you might find 4 months to be a long time. You know, people, when you ask this question, people say, no, it's the Lord, and it is everything happened in the Lord's time, in the Lord's time, as though we don't know that. We all know that. But when you have an emergency, and you have to wait 4 months for an answer from the Lord, now, humanly speaking, we might say that this is long. Yeah. Now, if you're more mature, we'll say, well, I'll bring my case before the Lord and I'll wait, and so on. But 4 months, let's be honest, it's a long time if you have an emergency. Because Nehemiah saw it as an emergency. Yeah? So yes and no. Beloved, God's intervention is always perfectly timed. Remember that? God's intervention is always perfectly timed. God's appointed time for Nehemiah arrived in Nisan, the first month of the Jewish religious calendar. That is roughly between March and April in our calendar. Now, God is ready to answer. Yes, it took 4 months. Yes, we know that. It is written in the Word. But God is ready to answer. But say you waited for an answer from God for a request that you had for 4 months. And when you receive the answer from God, what should you do? Remember, you prayed, you said that was urgent, God answered within 4 months. Yeah? Now God has answered. So what is your next step? You give thanks. Yes, you give thanks. What else? Pardon? You act. Yeah? You act. Remember, you waited 4 months for an answer. God gave you that answer. Yeah? And what are you going to do afterwards? Well, you have to act. And you can see the passage which I read to you from verse 1 to 8. And this is what we see with Nehemiah. Yes, he waited for months, but as soon as he got the answer from God, this man, he acted. You know, beloved, what is the best day or time for God to reply us? I'm asking a lot of questions tonight. What is the best day or time for God to reply to us? For anybody? What is the best day or time? Now this might be, you might think this is a tricky question. Nobody has an answer? When you least expect? When he's ready. When he's ready, yes, I agree. In his chosen time. Yeah? That is the best time, brethren, for God to reply us in his chosen time. Now, it is said that God's plans are worked out with the utmost precision. And, you know, the Bible is full of these kind of things, you know, because you hear in due time, right or wrong? Sometimes you hear in due time. Then you hear in the fullness of time. Yeah? At the appointed time. These are biblical concepts I'm bringing in due time, in the fullness of time, at the appointed time. My hour is not yet come. Remember he said that many times. A set time. Beloved, all his plans are executed with unwavering precision. God is never slack in fulfilling his threats or promises, you know. Remember Peter told us, God is never slack in fulfilling his threats and promises. You know, humans, we are not accurate at all. But another thing I want to tell you, God often steps in on behalf of his people when they least anticipate it. Isn't that true? Sometimes when you least anticipate, that is the time God is going to step in. And sometimes believers, by not recognizing God's way, they get discouraged and they think they have been overlooked. Isn't that true? So often we think that God has overlooked us. I have prayed and God is not answering my prayer. And there are other people, they prayed and God has answered, but God is not answering my prayer. And then you get so discouraged. And sometimes we even get angry with God. Remember David, when David looked around, he was a godly man, serving God. He was a man after God's own heart. But then David, sometimes he was on the run, when Saul was behind him. Sometimes he was sick. And then when he looks at other people around, people were not even serving God as he used to serve God. And he see these people, they never get sick, and they seem to be happy, and they seem to have everything. And David, for a moment, it's almost like, I'll serve God, I will, but I'm not going to defend him. And that's why when you look at Psalm 4, he's looking at himself and say, what did I do? What did I say? Stand in awe and sin not. You understand? God is God, and God will always be God. So while we're looking for him to show up one way, he comes in another way. And while we are searching down one path, beloved, behold, he comes by another. And sometimes our darkest hours are often God's best opportunities. Maybe you can look at your life, and maybe you have a story to tell. Maybe one day you can have a testimony to share. That darkest hour when you think all was lost, all was gone, and this is the time God comes and he answers us. Beloved, God usually steps in for his people at their greatest need. Always remember that. It was the same thing we are seeing here with Nehemiah. Nehemiah was so distressed. Remember, his face showed it for the first time, All the years that he has served Artaxerxes as the cupbearer, he never showed any kind of sour face, anything. But the first time he showed that. And the reason is because Nehemiah had a very great need. The Jews' situation was getting desperate. When he got this report, and you saw what he did. When he got this report, he wept and cried and he prayed to God. And we studied the prayer last week. Yeah. So it was a desperate time, sort of desperate situation. Now, God stepped in at the worst moments as well. Remember when the children of Israel left Egypt and they were happy because they saw the hand of God and all the miracles, the plagues which God sent upon the Egyptians, and they left with everything, with their cattle and their children and everything they had. And they were merrily going to the to Canaan, the land which God promised. But what happened? While they were going, a few days, they got to the Red Sea. And could you imagine the test of faith there? By God's mighty hand, God kept saying that. I delivered you all by my mighty hand, and now only to get to the Red Sea. So either you go back to Egypt or you swim across. So it was a test of faith. And of course, it should spark gratitude, but we didn't see that in the lives of the children of Israel. But one thing, it shows how we ought to depend upon God. Not only the children of Israel, not only Nehemiah in this desperate situation, but all of us, we ought to depend upon God. Not upon your own strength, not your ability. You should thank God for your ability. Show gratitude to him for all what he has given you, all the blessings. But you as a Christian, you have to depend upon him for everything. And the second thing, beloved, I want to say is that God's intervention requires people to step up and cooperate. Nehemiah ended up in Babylon because his family was taken as prisoners. Remember? When the Babylonians came, they took them they had to leave the country, driven to Babylon. So he was considered as a stranger, although he was born there, but he was a Jew. So they would consider him as a stranger. And he belonged to a different faith as well. Yet, beloved, he is God's agent as well as the king's servant. A stranger in this land, a strange religion, because the religion of Judaism was so different to the religion of the Persians. So a stranger with a different faith, but yet he was God's agent and also the king's servant. But do you think the reason he was chosen is because he was qualified for this appointed task? Remember, he prayed, and then the question is, do you think the reason he was chosen is because he was qualified for this appointed task? Anybody? He was prepared. He was prepared for this task by God. Yeah, that's a good. Yeah. Yes.
I think what I've been looking in his heart
Mm-hmm.
as to whether he was qualified, like he had the expertise or the knowledge. I don't know, but I think God used his willingness, his heart,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe whatever else was in Nehemiah at the time. I was not.
But shouldn't that be a qualification if God prepared me? I went to the school of God. What's your qualification? I went to God's school, and He's the one who prepared me. So I think that's the best qualification, really. So I think he was qualified. He was a man of vision. We'll look at it later on, and even in verse 5. Let me read verse 5. And I said unto the king, if it please the king, and if by thy servant have found, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldest send me unto Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it. Yeah? He's going to Judah, he's going to Jerusalem. The walls are broken, the people are disconsolate, there is no motivation, people are very sad and unhappy, the gates are burned and they have enemies and all sorts of things. Yeah? But he said unto the king, if it please the king, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldest send me unto Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchre, that I may build it. And so, beloved, he was a man of vision. He knew that the job would be very difficult. And you can see the things that he asked. He asked for timber, and he asked for safe passage, because he knew that this is a very difficult task. But he wanted to do it. Yeah? He wanted to do it. And later on we'll see how successful he was in building the wall. So he was a man with vision, and also he was very resourceful, finding solutions, and of course we'll see that in chapter 3, finding solutions to problems and these sort of things. So his appeal to Artaxerxes was a master class in clever diplomacy. And let me tell you why. Let's read. Just turn to your Bibles from verse 3. And said unto the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad, when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres, lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? Then the king said unto me, For what dost thou make request? So I prayed to the God of heaven. Now let's stop there. When the king said, For what are you making the request? He said, I prayed to the God of heaven. What do you understand by that? You think he was afraid? Yes, brother?
For me, it was a prayer on the spur of the moment.
Yeah, I think so. That's a prayer at the spur of the moment. And I said unto, no, for what dost thou make request? My goodness, what am I going to say? Yeah. So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said unto the king, If it please the king, and if thy servants have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldest send me unto Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it. And the king said unto me, the queen also sitting by him, For how long shall thy journey be, and when wilt thou return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. Moreover, I said unto the king, If it please the king, let letters be given me to the governors beyond the river, that they may convey me over till I come into Judah, and a letter unto Asa, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the palace which appertain to the house, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall enter into. And the king granted me according to the good hand of my God upon me. Carefully chosen words. Humble respect, beloved, for authority. The way he approached the king, you could see that he was very humble, and he showed that he had respect for the king. But what I find interesting is the way he brought in, of course we can say it's by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, the way he brought in this reverence for ancestral grounds. You know, he spoke about the sepulchres of the fathers. They say they are left in ruin. And well, let me tell you why it is important. Because the Persians and even those old empires and so on, countries, they had great respect for sepulchres, the tombs of their forefathers. You understand? If you violate that, yeah, you can find yourself in trouble. And when Nehemiah brought it in, you know, he said about the condition of the sepulchres, I think it must have resonated with the king. Somebody said it is a winning formula when you are dealing with the Eastern rulers. Spiritually, beloved, he was very equipped with every grace required to do this difficult work. Because Nehemiah, he had courage. Remember, he said that I'm going to build that city. I'm going to build that wall. Yeah, I'm going to do it. Yeah, he didn't have money. He knew the condition of the people, how bad it was. And how can I motivate these people to do anything? And I'm sure they must have told him about of course from Ezra he would know, the opposition, the enemies. So they had so many things against him, but he was so courageous. And Nehemiah too, brethren, he had a lot of sympathy. As you read, as we study that letter, this book, you will see, and he was generous. You know, he had a table for people who came from Babylon, and if the things were hard, he used to feed them. As a matter of fact, he had a table for about 150 people. Yeah, and he was very devoted to God. Nehemiah was a godly man. Yeah. So let me ask you, in the work that we do for God, are you courageous? Do you have sympathy? Are you generous? Are you a godly person? And these are the things, brethren, that will make a spiritual man. We must be courageous in the times that we are living in, or else we'll just go into our shells and we'll do nothing for the Lord. We must have sympathy. Yeah, people are hurting. Yeah, and as Christian people, we have to get into their lives, and we have to be generous. We have to give. Sometimes Christians are very stingy, and even though they see people are struggling and there's a great need, as I said the last time, they'll just tell you, "I'll pray for you." Yeah, of course, you have to pray, but of course, we should do more than prayer. Yeah. So he was a very godly man. But let me tell you something. God picks the right people for big jobs. You agree with that? God picks the right people for big jobs, matching great talent with tough task. And that was Nehemiah. God picked him. Yeah, he was the right person to do that great job. Of course, he was talented. Now, he had another advantage. He was well positioned as well. As you know, he was the cupbearer. He was a trusted servant of King Artaxerxes. So, my friends, when God has work for his servants to do, he, by his providence, places them where they can do the work. You want me to repeat that? When God has work for his servants to do, he, by his providence, places them where they can do that work. And if you are in that church, I want you to see yourself as someone God has placed in that church. You understand? We came from different backgrounds, different communities. Some of us are from Vieux-Fort, others from Choiseul. And if you go around, we're from all over the place. Yeah? But where are we? We are in Cul-de-sac. We are in Cul-de-sac at the Patience Baptist Church. And whether we like it or not, it is God by his providence who has placed us here. And because God has placed us here, we supposed to get involved in the ministry. We're supposed to get involved in gospel work. Because that is the main business of the church. Gospel work. Get involved. Preach the gospel. We are told whether people want to hear or not, you are a servant of God. Place you in the church. Not only just to come to church and go home. That's not the way it is. But we have to get involved because we are servants of the living God. I don't want anybody to tell me, because I come to church, I'm a servant of God. What makes you a servant because you go to church? A servant is one who serves. Yeah. So when we come to church, we come to worship God. We come to hear his word so that we could grow. We come to hear the gospel, and we rejoice at the gospel because this is the method God has ordained to call people from their sins. So we rejoice at that. But the thing is, we do the work of God. Spread the gospel. All of us, we heard the gospel from somebody, right or wrong? All of us here. Somebody had to preach to us. Somebody had to take the Bible, yeah, and go out and preach the gospel. Whether we were invited to a church, or we passed somewhere and we attended a crusade, or something, yeah. But we heard the gospel because somebody took the challenge, and they brought the gospel. So where we are, we have to be there, not only to warm benches or chairs, but we are here so that we can serve God, because it is by the providence of God that we are here. Yeah, I'm right from Vieux-Fort, and I'm pastoring here. So Nehemiah evidently was a favorite with King Artaxerxes from the fact that he chose him to this important office over the heads of the Persian nobles, you know. You'd think that Artaxerxes would choose a Persian noble, somebody of his type. But this is not the person that he chose. Beloved, if he had a different role as Nehemiah, it would be very difficult, you know, for him to get the king's attention. Huh? Supposing he was working in the palace, where you have a lot of staff, but he was working maybe in a restaurant or dining, you know, a cook or he was working in the grounds or he was doing some clerical work in a back office somewhere. It would be very difficult for him to have the king's heirs and so on. But look at where God placed him. God placed him, remember I told you, a stranger with a different faith, and God placed him in such an important position so that at the appointed time, Nehemiah would have the heirs of the king. That is when God was ready for Nehemiah to go and start to rebuild Jerusalem. So, beloved, remember God assigns our place and situation and wants us to make the most of them. Beloved, not try to change things, thinking will serve him better elsewhere. Some people, they say that they're in the church. They're not happy in the church. They want to go elsewhere because they believe they will serve God better elsewhere. And sometimes they go elsewhere, they do nothing. I can remember some people, they left the Caribbean and they said that God has called them to go to America. Christians, God called them to go to America because God has a great work for them, and most of them, they were working 2 jobs in restaurant and so on, you know. They had no time to not even go to church. But they say God who called them to America. You think that's what God will call you to do? Yeah? You are not even involved in ministry. So remember that God assigns our place and situation, and He wants us to make the most of them. Don't try to change things. Thank God for where you are. Okay, if you're in a church where they teach heresy, and you have all sorts of issues, and the pastor not listening, and people are living ungodly, no matter what you do, the church is getting worse, and it's your conviction to leave, I can understand, you know. But when God placed you in a church, remember it is by His providence that He placed you there. And this is where God expects you to stay and serve Him and to do His work. Another thing, beloved, my time is up. I can't believe that. Nehemiah, he was motivated by the right reasons. Beloved, his request wasn't driven by personal ambition, but by a genuine, selfless desire for God's people and His holy city. That's what that motivated him. He was not ambitious, wanted to do things for himself, to better himself, as we hear today. Yeah? But he was a genuine, a genuine believer, selfless desire for God's people and His holy city. No desire for gain. For he used his fortune, and you're going to see that. The monies which he had, he used it to feed the poor, You know that? Huh? That's what Nehemiah did. He used his money to feed the poor and entertaining the returning exiles in his own house at Jerusalem. Sometimes Christian people, we don't even want people to come to our house. You understand? We don't want people. But this man, he had a table for about, that could sit about 150 people, This man was just, he was always looking for other people. He was so selfless. And we have to ask ourselves whether we are like that, brethren. Are we selfless? Do we give our money to help, people, even people who are in the church, who are in need? Do we do that? Do we entertain people, strangers, when they visit us? Do we do these things? Do we take the time to do that? I go overseas very often, and sometimes I get so many invitations I have to turn down. It's not a nice thing to do, but sometimes it's just too much. Because people, they see you as a stranger, as a visitor, and they try to help as much as they can. They invite you to dinner, lunch, whatever, and so on. Are we doing these things? And this is what selfless people do, brethren. Yeah? We look for other people, not ourselves. So those who are engaged in God's work must lay aside all thoughts of worldly gain or personal honor. Sometimes you have pastors, and you sit with them, and the only thing they talk about is investments they have. Investment in this, investment in that. You should invest your life in the ministry. God is going to provide for you. You understand? They're investing in stock. They bought this house and they're repairing it. And you have to ask yourself whether they have time to do the Lord's work. And maybe when they come on the pulpit, they just bluff their way, and by shouting and all these other things. And some people, they believe when they shout, you believe they're preaching. But when you examine what they say a lot of rubbish. So, if you are involved in ministry, I'm not talking about you all with jobs, secular jobs, you have to do that. But if you are a pastor and you are on the church payroll, and the church is paying you to do a job, you focus on the job which God has called you to do. Now you might say, well, you have to be wise, pastor, you have to invest. If you have time to invest, but when you take the Lord's time, to get involved in all these sort of things, and the work of God is suffering, this is sinful. You think Nehemiah would ever do that? Never. He would not do that, my friends. So if we are engaged in God's work, we must lay aside all thoughts of worldly gain or personal honor. Your reward will come. You understand? Your reward will come. We allow the world to motivate us. We are so motivated by the things of the world. And the same way the secular people look at their life, and they want to be honorable, and they want to look successful. And Christian people, sometimes we have no time to do anything you have a job. You have a job. As soon as you finish it, you go and do something else. You'll never say, well, I have a job and I can survive. It's tight, but I can survive. The Lord is good. The Lord is going to provide for me. Yeah? Well, the time that I have, let me spend it doing the Lord's work. How many people would do that? How many people? Beloved, there is a reward, but it is not worldly. The reward that we will get, I know I have to stop, but the reward that we will get from God, it is not a worldly reward. Okay? And finally, just give me a minute. Beloved, God intervened and things fell into place in a pretty remarkable way. All these, my friends, were known to God and factored in. Nehemiah was unusually sad, remember? Because when the king saw him, he said, "Why are you so sad? What is wrong?" He said, "I had not been before time sad in his presence." This is the first time he looked sad in the king's presence. The Greek God, You know the Greek mythology. They always have something. The god of personification and satire. How do you call it? Call him Momus or something like that. He said, you know what he said? He said, I wish man had a window in his heart to see his intentions and thoughts. that's what the Greek god for personification and satire said. I wish man had a window in his heart so that he could see his thoughts and intentions. But let me tell you, this is not necessary. You know why? Because Proverbs 15 verse 13 said, a merry heart maketh a glad countenance, but by sorrow of heart the spirit is broken. Or we can say, when people are happy, they smile. Right or wrong? If you are happy, you smile. And when you are sad, you look depressed. That is true. So Nehemiah looked depressed. He was not this always happy man. Happy. And you know what I find? I know you all would not like me tonight, okay, but I love you all, okay? I find some Christian people, they never smile. They never smile. You think it's right for a Christian never to smile? Every time you look at them as a plate of sorrows, they are always depressed. It's almost like God, I don't know whether it's a medical thing or biological thing, but some Christians, they never smile. Brethren, we can give a little smile. Yeah? So if you always look sad and sour, people might not know when you have a problem. Nehemiah was maybe always happy. But when he was sad, the king observed that. And I believe Christian people, I'm not saying you have to be happy like people who take drugs and so on. But we can smile for one another. We can make time to talk to people and smile and share some jokes or whatever, and have fellowship. Yeah? And when we are sad, people will see it. It will be no surprise. People will see it on your face. You know, the Hebrews say that a man's inside is turned out and and discovered in his eyes, his little pockets, and his little cups. Let me tell you what they mean by that. They mean a person's true nature is revealed through their eyes. Why? Because they're thinking of what you are looking at with your eyes. Yeah? And then he said, their pockets, what they value. Yeah? What they value, whether it's materially possessed, or their cups is what they consumed, like food and drink. Yeah? So it is like saying the eyes are the windows of the soul, yeah, and extending it to other outward expressions in inner character. But I'm gonna finish there. The king was unusually friendly. And let me tell you, most Eastern monarchs would have condemned him at once, either to banishment or death. You are serving me, you are my cupbearer, and you look so miserable. You understand? You look so miserable. They said, when it comes to the Persians, the Eastern rulers, they said, sad looks were in their eyes bad looks, If you look sad, they say, that's not looking good. What is he planning? He's planning to poison me? So this is the way they would be thinking. Are you plotting something against me? But as you know, love thinketh no evil. And the king had confidence in his servant. And remember, the queen was there. Now this is very unusual, because when the king has function, the queen is not there unless you are called. Remember the problem with Haman and Mordecai. And Mordecai wanted Esther to go to the king, and Esther was afraid because she said, the king hasn't called me, and if I go and he didn't present the scepter, that means he can kill me, because I have no right to come to the king Esther had no right to go to the king unless the king called her. And that is the way they used to operate. Yeah? But what happened? Esther knew when she heard from Mordecai, she knew that the Jewish people were in trouble. And that's why she said, if I perish, I perish. And she went to the king, and she was well received. But the thing here, maybe when, I don't know, when Nehemiah saw the queen there, I wonder whether he was afraid. Is it something they're going to do to the queen? Why is the queen there? You understand? Or is it something that will work in his favor? Because they said, when a woman is there by a man, and even though the woman doesn't say anything, the woman can have influence on the man, on the man's decision. And maybe, he was able to soften up the king's harsh mood and help Nehemiah's case. But anyway, we have to stop there. But I just want to show you, brethren, how in all what happened there, God was in control, and he was the one who intervened for Nehemiah. And how thankful we must be to our God. And this is the way he always intervenes in our lives at the right time.